I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. This is the Alcohol Mastery Podcast, Session 10. Alright, today I just wanted to talk a bit about self-perception again, but more in terms of looking after yourself and being your own therapist, so to speak. I'm a huge fan of self-help. I've always been into self-help. I haven't put a lot of that into practice. The reason for that is because I've always been a drinker, and because drink was such a big, heavy influence in my life, it was very difficult to try and move things on and stick to a plan. So a plan would last a couple of weeks at most, and it's very hard to try and think things through when even once a week you're out and you're frying your brain. There's just not, it's not good for you. But since I've stopped, I'm 2 years into this, and I have learned so much, and I've been able to retain information. I've been able to plan, to stick to plans. I've had a few sort of brain farts on the way, and I haven't managed to sort of get them out every week, but I've been there or thereabouts, and most of the time I haven't done it, it's always been because I've sort of hit a brick wall in something, and everything else has sort of come up behind me and sort of is waiting to push on while I'm trying to get over this hump. And I'm learning how to deal with those sorts of things, but I've learned, the videos are not professional by any standard yet. These audios are not professional by any standard yet, but I hope to push myself towards that level in the future. I still have sort of issues, not with my weight anymore. I'm sick, tired of getting onto this weighing scales and weighing myself, and then going on this diet and thinking, in those terms, in that way, about my body and about how much I weigh. And it's just a stupid way of looking at things. The way I'm trying to look at things from now on is to look at it like, is to keep certain things out of my diet, or at an absolute minimum. So to keep a lot of fat on my diet, to try and keep a lot of water in my diet, keep a lot of carbonated drinks out of my diet, to keep a lot of exercise in my life, and to do things like that, and to try and push myself down a road that is not looking at my weight, so to speak, but is looking at the way I look. So how do I feel to myself? I really don't want to get to that stage where I've reached my ideal weight, whatever the hell that is, and then I'm the slave to the weighing scales for the rest of my life. I don't want to do that. Anyway, I'm sort of going off on a tangent. That's normal. But I think it's only by testing these things out on yourself that you actually can figure out how to do these things with yourself. There is so much information out there now. There's so many different diets or ways to look at this kind of thing. And diets are going to work for some people. That's just a fact. It's going to work for some people. It just doesn't work for me. I don't like, that's not my mentality. I've been taking my weight, and I think I'm not sure if I'm going to continue taking my weight sort of maybe once a month just to try and give me a gauge of where I am, but I don't know if that's the same sort of mentality. But where I'm coming from in this is that you are your best teacher. You know, you are the one that can that knows how these things are affecting you inside. Once you start reading your own science, once you can start figuring out how your operating system works, and you only do that by actually listening. And when you're drinking, it's impossible to do it because you're fluctuating all over the place. You know, there's just no stability. But once you stop drinking, you start getting a certain stability in your life, and that stability increases and increases until, one good habit leads to another good habit, and you start building on these things. I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago about the keystone habits. You know, you start by going out and exercising, and then you find yourself getting fitter and fitter, and then you start to think about your diet, and you think, well, if I wasn't eating that or drinking that, then it would, maybe make me a little bit fitter. I'd feel that little bit better. And it's the same with the alcohol. Once you get alcohol out of your life, and you start to figure out things like what to do when you're bored, what to do instead of sat in front of the television every night. And you can get a lot of that stuff by just listening and attuning yourself to yourself. You find that a lot easier once you do get on that level. Once everything starts to level out. And there's something to be said. If you go to a private therapist, for instance, one of the first things that they're going to do, the first few sessions, the few therapy sessions, is going to be trying to understand you, to try and get a grasp of who you are, why you're here, what your problems are. Actually, the first thing that they've got to do is they've got to fill in all the paperwork. I mean, this is where all the words like alcoholic, recovery, sober, all these words are from therapists who need to fill in boxes on an insurance form or a hospital admissions form, or they're helpful to those people to say, well, this guy is a second degree alcoholic, or he's an end stage alcoholic, or it's a label that is not helpful to you. I've always said this about those type of labels, that it doesn't help you to quit, it doesn't help you to cure yourself. It's there purely for the forms. And once this sort of process of identifying which label, and that can take a while. That can take 2 or 3 sessions just on its own, just trying to identify where you are, what type of an alcoholic you are. Are you an alcoholic, or are you a problem drinker? And one of the biggest difficulties with this is that there is no consensus across the board as to what these terms mean, even in the medical community. One doctor won't necessarily agree with the description of an alcoholic with another doctor of the same person. So 2 people are looking at the same patient, and one doctor says, yeah, he's an alcoholic, the other doctor says, no, he's just a heavy drinker, So that's one issue. The next issue is that when you go to a doctor and you go through the therapy sessions, then they have got to try and get into your head. And the only way they can do that is by getting to know your background, which they get to know through you. So they're relying on you to take what you know about yourself, translate it into words, speak those words to them. Then the doctor has got to take those words, translate them into their own perceptions, and come to a conclusion based on their own perceptions about what you are like and who you are. And, that's an impossible task. And then, once the therapy sessions go on, this therapist has to listen to your individual, what you've gone through that week, and try and understand them through their perception of your perception. And it's not even trying to understand it through your perception, it's through their perception of the translation of your perception. I know this sounds like, but it's just, language is not a great medium to try and communicate very abstract thoughts and processes. And seeing as every person who's got a problem with drinking, their whole the whole processes behind that are very individual, very unique to that person. So whereas you, on the other hand, once you get to know yourself and you get to know your own problems, you know them intimately. You know them inside out because they're your perceptions. This is how you see the world. Your drinking is, every time you drink, your problems are through your perception. It's only through your perception that you can see them. And your problems are your perception. Everything that you do in your life is through your perception. Every thought that you make is through your perception. So you get to know these triggers. You get to know these. Understand the triggers about your alcohol first. This is the problem. Get rid of that. You overcome the alcohol, and you're up and down like on a roller coaster for a long while. Maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. You've got this up and down cycle, and slowly but surely those oscillations up and down will get narrower and narrower. They won't be as varied, and after a while you will start to see things leveling out. And what I'm saying is that your decisions will become much more clearer. Your actions will become much more clearer. Your actions will be the same today as they are at the end of the week. Whereas when you were drinking, your actions on a Monday could be completely different to what you're doing on a Friday. Completely different to what you were doing on a Sunday. Completely different to what you were thinking. And it's those differences in your thinking that make your actions so off the kilter, so just up and down. You're much more able to understand when something is not right. So, like a few weeks ago when I sort of hit a brick wall, and I knew I'd hit it. It was like I just got to the stage where I was doing the videos. I was trying to do them every week, and 1 week I wasn't doing one, and the following week I was getting. I really want to get these done every week. Plus, I wanted to do the podcast, and I was just making a big deal out of a small task. I mean, it takes a while. It takes an effort to get them done, but it shouldn't. At this stage, after doing 80 of them, it should be flowing, and it was because there was other things that were happening. To do with alcohol mastery and to do with my personal life. Not bad things, but just distractions. And those distractions were coming in, and they were sort of, instead of being focused on the one thing at one time, I was sort of trying to focus on one thing, but my mind was being dragged somewhere else. Now, that was my life when I was drinking. Lack of focus. It was just, I couldn't do anything, I couldn't plan anything because my attention was constantly being dragged here to there and everywhere. I could sit there at the beginning of the week and go, right, this week I'm going to do so many meters in the forest. I'm going to try and get so much work done. And Wednesday, maybe it's afternoon, a friend of mine would call up and say, do you fancy a pint tonight? And I could be miles away. I could have every intention of staying away that night, but the thought processes that would start to click over in my head would be, I've got to go home now to this B&B that I'm staying in and really be on my own all night, or go down to the pub here and not really know anyone, or I can drive home and I can have a few pints with my mate. And I'd start convincing myself, and eventually, obviously it would happen. It wouldn't take much convincing, but what your brain is trying to do is it's trying to not convince you to do it, but it's trying to convince you that is the right decision, that you can go home and that you can make everything right by doing something different tomorrow, or maybe coming back down tomorrow. And in the back of your mind that there was no way I was coming back down tomorrow if I went out tonight. So if I went home on the Wednesday and said to myself, I'll go out and have 2 or 3 pints, 4 pints, just for the company and stuff like that. I'm sick of being on my own. But I'll go to bed early, and never worked out that way. As soon as I got into the pub, I had the 3rd pint, and it was like, to hell with that. I'm not going home. I'm not going out tomorrow. I might as well sit here now and have 15 pints or 20 pints and go home at 2 o'clock in the morning and not be able to function for not only the next day but the 2 days afterwards. So it's impossible to keep any sort of consistent focus when you're doing that to yourself. When you're scrambling your brain so much, when you're sort of pulling yourself from this part of your life to another part of your life, and all because of getting high, taking a drug. So, but once you get onto that level, onto that plateau, you've done all the heavy climbing, you've got up to the top, and you've sort of got to the stage now where you're not thinking about alcohol anymore. It only enters your mind every so often, and it's a nice place to be. You get to a stage where you think about it, and then you think, twat, what are you thinking like that for, and it's just a thought that comes into your head, and it disappears as quickly as it comes. But once you get to that stage, you automatically can think clearer about things. And the reason I'm talking about this with therapists and putting it into that framework is because if you can deal with something as big as this in your life, then you can deal with anything. And it's learning a few key tools, learning that couple of keystone habits that are going to bring you forward. And then you add to those habits and you bring them on. And you build a life for yourself. And there's no therapist in the world that can do that to you. Because, when you do hit that brick wall, you can sit down for 5 minutes and you can think it through. And you can think, well, how am I going to approach this now? What's a different way of approaching it? Right, I'll try this. So you go off and you try a different direction. And if that's not working, you can sort of see within your own framework very quickly that it's not working. So it doesn't take big time again, to sort of, well, rethink a little bit more. So I'm sort of heading in the right direction now, what can I do? Yeah, I'll go in this other direction. So you go with, and I'm not talking about making wild tangents and completely changing your mind about where you're going. You're heading in one direction. You're focused on a goal. This is your goal in your life that you want to achieve. And once you have that goal in mind, that is your primary aim. You know, whatever it is, whether it's building a business, whether it's being a better father, mother, whatever. This is your primary goal in life. And it keeps you absolutely focused on the direction that you're going. So you're not making wild splits in your journey. You're not sort of going 1 minute. You're not going one direction 1 minute and another direction the next minute. It's only minor adjustments that you're making. So each minor adjustment builds on the next and builds on the previous one, and you move on to the next one. So but the point is that you are capable, because everything's in your perception, of making the correct judgment every time. You know, whether it's the wrong judgment, whether it's a slightly different path that you maybe shouldn't have taken, and you're stepping back a little bit and you're heading in a different direction. The ultimate decision is right, because you're the one that's making it. You know, you're the one that knows all the facts. You understand your own perceptions. You understand your own thoughts. You understand precisely where it is that you want to go. You have done all this visualization. You've gone through all your affirmations, and you have a clear picture of where you want to end up, and that picture can only be yours. No matter how much you try and tell it to somebody else, you're never going to be able to do it full justice. Not only because it's very difficult to translate into language, but your picture is going to change. It's going to evolve as you grow, and guaranteed that without alcohol in your life, without this thing holding you back, and with the right tools, with the right thinking, with positive thinking, determination, with that forward-thinking goal that you've got in the distance, no matter how much that changes, you are going to succeed. You will have this. It's almost an epiphany. Like, I hate religious words. I'm just not a religious person. I don't like the connotation, but that word epiphany is sort of it's one of the few words that does it any justice. And you can achieve all this because not only do you understand yourself, but you can make those split-second decisions. This is the way I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to try now. This is not working now, so I'm going to take a little detour here and try something different. There's no therapist in the world that can help you out with that. At the end of the day, you're there for yourself. You're the only person in this world that is completely there for yourself, that is ever going to do them 100% for you. You're the only person in the world that is capable of putting any of this into practice. You can listen to me talking every day of the week. You can read books, you can read, you can listen to audios, you can listen to videos, but unless you actually sit down and think about where you're going to go and how you can apply these things to yourself, and then get up and do it, and put the whole thing into a plan and follow it, you're never going to do anything. You're never going to achieve these things, and you'll be disappointed about where you've gone. You'll be disappointed in the results. You have to give yourself 100% commitment, because if you don't, who else is going to do that for you? You know, nobody else can. Even the people that are the closest to you, your children, your parents, cannot give that 100% commitment. They can't physically do the work for you. They can't think the thoughts for you, you know. There's people can push you, and they can try and motivate you to change your thinking, but only you can actually make those changes, you know. So I said last week about positive thinking. The more books that you can read, the more positivity that you can get into your life, and the more negativity you can leave out of it, the easier it becomes to train your mind into thinking along those lines, that you can do it, that, you know, there's nobody that's going to stop you from doing it, but there's nobody also that's going to be able to make you do it if you don't want to do it. So, but the whole point about this thing was just to sort of let you know where I'm coming from, that I can only, everything that I do is purely focused on trying to get you to understand that you are the one that can do it, that anybody can do it. You know, if a gone being like me can do it, anybody can do it. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, there is so many things that are different in my life now, and all because I made that one decision to quit, to stop doing this to myself. And that becomes a snowball, and as you start getting momentum, that snowball starts to pick up snow. The habit that you are breaking, you start building small habits around it, you start changing your life, and those habits start to get momentum, and they automatically magnetize other habits, because you feel good about your life. You feel like you're achieving something. You know, you feel how much the alcohol must have been holding you back. You know, there's no doubt in your mind now about it, that, you know, alcohol was the one thing in your life that was pulling you back. And, you stop looking behind you. You stop looking at what could have been or what might have been. If only I'd have done this. And you switch your focus to what can be. And regardless of what age you are, it's the younger you do this, obviously it's going to be better. You have more life ahead of you, but nobody knows, how much you've got. You could be 70 years old and you could still have 30 years ahead of you. You could still have 40 years ahead of you. You don't know what's around the corner. And the way to live your life, even if you are 70, is to think, well, yeah, I'm going to live for the next 100 years. I mean, why not? What have you got to lose by it? People say, well, don't think that you're fooling yourself. Well, why? If you think I'm not going to last that long, you're certainly not. It always. I remember people when I was working in factories years ago, and you'd hear stories about people that had worked in the same factory for 40 years, and once they got to the 65th birthday, they were given a clock or a watch or whatever off the owners. Thank you for 40 years of service. Good luck to you. Adios. Out the door. And they went out looking forward to a retirement. And what retirement meant was doing nothing. So what they were actually doing to their brain was they were saying, well, you're not needed anymore for anything. We've achieved everything that we're ever going to achieve. Now it's just, playing golf. And a lot of these people died within 2 or 3, 4 years of retiring. And I don't know what that's about. Maybe that's just a massive coincidence, but I don't think so. Education in yourself first and foremost. Teach your kids that, educate themselves, about how to help themselves. This bullshit about asking, looking for help. I'm not talking about advice and direction, that's different, but looking for the magic pill that's going to magically cure your problems without you doing any of the work it's not there. There's no such thing. But there's plenty of people around that will tell you that it's there. And they're only doing that for one reason, and that's to make money out of it. It's all about hard work. Whatever way you look at it, it's going to be hard work, but it's hard work that is going somewhere. Drinking every day is fucking hard work. I mean, face it, all this thing and all the damage that you're doing to your body, and that ain't going to get better by more drinking. That just gets worse. So, this has gone into a rant now. It's back to the same thing, I just feel like I am a different person. I am a more a successful person in my own eyes. And success is, can only be really judged by yourself, ultimately. If you don't judge yourself successful, then you're not. You could be the most successful person in the world, but if you don't see it, then what's the point? You've got to sort of get to the end of your life and think, well, I achieved something, it doesn't have to be, it can be anything, whatever you set out to do, that's your goal. My whole way of thinking now has got onto that plateau, onto that level. And, I'd even say that it's, the more I learn, the easier certain things are getting. So not only has it got onto a plateau, but I'm going downhill now, it's getting easier to do these kind of things. And the easier it gets to do them, the more confidence you have in yourself, the more confidence you have in your own abilities to be able to do these things. And you'll take on bigger aims in your life. The goal that you started out with when you stopped drinking alcohol, maybe you achieved that within no length of time. Maybe you decide that, the goal wasn't big enough to start off with, so you aim a bit higher. And you start aiming higher and higher and higher, and eventually, sky's the limit. I can't tell you where you're going to go. I can't tell you what goals to aim at. I can't tell you how to get there. I can sort of say there is only the same simple tools that have been known for thousands of years. Human tools, and there's different spins on those, and people try and spin them around and say, well, this is all new, but it's not. It's human endeavour. It's endeavouring to do the thing and to be the best, and to be determined, and to get out there and push yourself to achieve. All those things have been there since the beginning, hundreds of thousand years. They're all the human qualities that we've got. And, modern day life sort of saps a lot of that stuff, and pulls a lot of that out and leaves a lot of shit behind it. And I think alcohol was one of the big things, especially for me anyway. So anyway, enough of the rant, enough of the podcast for today. If you have any questions at all, if you want to leave a comment, I'd love to hear any stories that you've got. I'd love to hear your ideas on a concept, actually. Sometimes I ask on the newsletter for suggestions for different things, and I'm trying to figure out a way of sort of getting it onto the website where there's a page for different things, so that people can come on. The forum is not a great spot for this, I don't think, because it's too random, and it serves a different purpose. But say for say for things like triggers. So you have a page with triggers on it, and you guys come on and you put what triggers your alcohol off, you know, and I don't know whether to put that in different sections, and you just comment in the post below, and I don't know what you think about that. Let me know. Send me an email, put a comment under this post, and let me know if you think that's a good idea, if it's a bad idea, if you have any variations, you know, just let me know one way or another. So until next time, I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. Onwards and upwards.